it led to science. Now, Zorio just rejects it out of hand.
This is why he goes into practical reason, which is another arm of reason, where reason works, because reason can't do everything. This is why he goes into practical.
Where does reason work? Because reason can't do everything. Again, how are you going to evaluate it? Now, you, dear listener at home, can take Kant at his word if you want to, but I would leave those goods in the store. I wouldn't buy them if I were you.
Practical reason, which is another arm of reason, but it's not pure reason, which is what the critique of pure reason is, obviously. So things like space and time, that's the limit, one of the limits of reason, that you cannot imagine things without space and time.
Is that a limit of reason, that we can't imagine things without space and time? That means that reason is limited. Now, like I said, when you imagine a thing that is extended, you can't imagine it without space. When you imagine a thing that takes up space, space comes along with that thought. Is that a limit to reason, that we can't hold the contradiction in our minds? An object that takes up space without taking up space is a contradiction, and that's a limit to reason? I don't buy it, Zorio. I don't buy it. And this is why Ayn Rand said it's a very false facade. Kant's whole system is very fancy because there's these three books and it breaks reason up into these three, different ways, and there's two essential ways and there's two different worlds. All these obfuscations. Very fancy, but very false. Again and again and again and again and again we get these conclusions. Therefore you have to have faith. Therefore you have to believe in contradictions. Therefore reason is limited. Blah, blah, blah.
Now, what the categories are, it's not that reality is distorted. It's that you cannot imagine things. You cannot experience things without these ideas.
Now, how did Kant outline those categories? It's just amazing to think of where he got the information to tell us that all of our information is in this system and that we can never see any information outside of this system. And yet he's been able to see the whole system and understand it and give us a report such that he can write it down and publish it in a frickin' book and teach it in a university and admonish the entire world to follow his ideas. That's how sure he is of it. So it's not just a humdrum thing that he flips off some Sunday afternoon. He published this in a book. He got these ideas somewhere, right? He didn't just make them up, right? To justify his system, did he? Because if he did, he'd be a pretty evil guy, wouldn't he?
The idea behind Kant is essentially that when you experience the world, when your senses work, you are bombarded with sense data. That there is no coherent form or shape to things necessarily. Now, a good way of imagining this is that...
Now he says there's no coherent form or shape to things necessarily. Our senses put it on there. So earlier he objected when I said that our senses distort the real reality, and what we see is a distortion of the actual reality. Now that is true in Kant's interpretation, and it is simultaneously true that the actual reality does not exist. Only this world exists, because after all it's the only world we can ever get to with our senses. So the other world doesn't really exist in any real sense. But this world is an imperfect distortion of the real world. So we're just seeing the real world some fuzzy way. That's the nominal world. Now, are you getting how much you have to keep in the air and keep juggling? You have to hold all these contradictory views all the time, like a hippopotamus belly dancing and juggling. You have to keep holding contradictory views constantly. And eventually, if you buy into all of it and accept the fact of the feeling coming from faith and the categorical imperative and accept it all, then you'll be totally convinced.
What your mind does is it makes sense of that. It experiences just raw experience, raw sense data, and the human mind, the faculty of reason, through the categories, makes the image coherent.
Now, there is an interpretation of this in objectivism, and the interpretation is that there's three 3 levels. A baby, when it comes out of the womb, is on a level of sensation, we can say. He senses things. For a baby, his senses are in a sense turned on, and that's all. He can feel the pinprick when they take his blood from his foot or whatever, and he's cold. It's really cold out there, and he starts crying when they slap him and stuff. But it's just all nothing to him. He doesn't know one person's voice or another person's voice. He doesn't know the difference between a machine's noise and a person's voice. He doesn't know the difference between, if he opens his eyes, it's just nothing. A swimming cloud of virtually nothing. Now, here's an interesting fact I'll just put in here because it's an interesting fact. Newborn infants will actually look, they will gaze at a ping pong paddle with 3 black dots arranged as 2 eyeballs and a nose. Just black dots, 2 eyes and a nose on a ping pong paddle. And they will stare at it. They will gaze and follow it. A newborn. If you, on the other hand, put the 2 dots underneath and the 1 dot on top, so that it doesn't look at all like a human face, it looks like a triangle of dots on a round object, it doesn't even faze the baby. It doesn't care to look at it any more than any other object in the room. So that's interesting that they are very attracted to any semblance of a human face, and they would care to gaze into eyes. If they can find a pair of eyes to look into, a newborn baby likes to look into those eyes. Could you wonder about the evolutionary reasons why that occurs? But anyways, that's a total tangent. Sorry to have brought that up now. It deserves a video of its own, maybe. Back to the idiocy at hand.
So it presents itself in a rational way, because otherwise it literally blows your mind. And what the categories are that which are applied to experience in order to make sense of it. So, for example, quantity.
So the categories are how we make sense of experience, and we can't make sense of experience without them. There's no way to get to experience without our categories. And Kant was a very fine gentleman and outlined them all for us. You believe him if you want to.
Kant's really big on architectonics, and there's a lot of 4s and a lot of 3s, but there's always a 3 under a 4, and it's very strange.
Again, this is the very, very fancy facade on the front of Kant. This is why you can take Machiavelli and read him. You can take the Fountainhead and read it on camera and get meaning from it. You can even take Jared Diamond and read him on camera and talk about the stuff as you go. You can't really do it with Kant because it's just page after page of bizarre gyrations and obfuscations and baloney.
The idea is, if the world is completely atomic, the world is made up of, these tiny structures that we are unable to detect. It's just stuff, basically. Let's just say the world basically presents itself as stuff. Now,
again, Zorio, the world doesn't present itself. The world exists, and we look at it.
This table, and this book, and this water bottle, and this pen, and myself are really just atoms. But we don't actually experience the atoms.
Now, if we don't experience the atoms, what in God's name do we experience?
What happens is these clumps of stuff are seen as things by the mind.
We don't experience the atoms. We experience the electromagnetic field caused by the atoms. Because as everyone knows, atoms are more than 99.99% space. So we're not experiencing the atoms themselves. We're just experiencing the electromagnetic effects of the atoms. Well, what's the difference between experiencing the atom's effects on reality and the atom in reality? How would we experience the atom if we didn't experience its effects on reality, namely the electromagnetic effect? How would we experience it? What does it mean to say that we don't experience the atoms? What does that mean?
Abstract. But I think that concretizes it a little bit more than...
Well, it concretizes the first bit of it, and we see that it's so far nonsense.
The idea of perceiving through the categories, that sort of thing. So what are the categories? As I said, the first one is quantity, second is quality,